80 years ago, the European Union was built from the ruins of the Second World War with a clear promise that work and effort would let any Europeans live better than their parents' generation. The question is it holding? In our poll, 52% of Europeans believe their generation has fewer opportunities to succeed economically than their parents. But the picture is not uniform. From one side, there's the great optimistic European, Poland, who only 12% of Poles believe they have fewer opportunities than their parents. On the opposite side, the highest amount of fewer opportunities is France, with 68%. Here you could see how Spaniards and Germans, only 50% of them believe they have better opportunities. And then there's a clear descent in Belgium, Italy, and France. But within all each countries that we analyze, the generation that feels this pessimism most vivid is the youngest one, people under 35%, people under 35 years. Italy, the highest one, has a 93% of pessimism. France, 92%, and Spain, it's 80% of pessimism. But what drives this pessimism? 40% of Europeans have difficulty covering the basic cost of daily lives, everyday economic pressure. And the first position is energy with 28%, most likely because of the Iranian war. Then it's housing with 23%, and then it's food with 20%. But this pressure does not come only from lowest income. It also comes from it rich as well into the lower middle class and people who earn up to 2,000 euros per month. All this pessimism and all this economic pressure translate into a cross-class, cross-ideology dissatisfaction with their government response to the cost of living. Here you could see how France has the highest amount of dissatisfaction with 85%, Germany with 82%, Italy with 81%, Spain with 76%, Belgium 68%, even Poland, the great optimistic case, with 61%. As you can see, this is a much harder political problem to solve. We have analyzed the views of Europeans. Now it's up to the institution to respond. The question will be now, will they? Thank you, and let's hear from the panelists.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aitor Hernandez, and I'm a senior reporter at Politico. And during this panel, we are going to discuss the affordability crisis in Europe. In an interview with Barcelona Mayor Colboni, one of the comments that he made to us, which was really striking, was that he identified the housing crisis as a greater threat to Europe than Russia at this point, because it is very much creating that level of discontent that's feeding extremist movements and generally leading to doubts about the integrity of the European Union. In order to discuss that further, and in order to discuss a little bit of the aspects that are affecting Spain in particular as a touristic country, as a country with a very serious housing crisis, I am delighted to welcome to the stage Yolanda Díaz, the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain and the Minister of Labor. Vicepresidenta, quería empezar con una muy buena noticia, que son los datos del paro. No sé si nos podría contar un poco cómo se ha llegado a este hito histórico y un poco el secreto de España en este éxito.
Bueno, en primer lugar, buenos días. Gracias por invitarme a este evento y enhorabuena por el despliegue que estáis haciendo justamente aquí. Bueno, vamos a ver, durante 40 años el paro era el principal problema de nuestro país. Cuando llegué al Gobierno de España, en el año 2019, esto era así. Incluso en las facultades se nos decía que no se podía arreglar en las facultades de Derecho el problema de la temporalidad en España. Es más, hubo 52 reformas laborales en España, hechas por el Partido Popular o por el Partido Socialista, que no arreglaban el problema de la temporalidad en España. Bueno, ahora mismo, sí que ahora les digo que en estos días justamente, de manera real, no desestacionalizada, sí tenemos 22 millones de personas ocupadas en España. Les doy otra noticia. Las estimaciones que hacemos desde el Ministerio de Trabajo y Economía Social es que estos 22 millones de personas ocupadas en España se van a mantener a lo largo de todo el año 2026. ¿A qué se explica todo esto? Pues se explica sencillamente a un marco normativo, hijo del diálogo social con acuerdo tripartito, que cambió el paradigma en nuestro país. Una reforma laboral que dijo sustancialmente dos cosas. Una, tenemos que hacer de la estabilidad en el empleo la norma y no la temporalidad. Efectivamente, esto se está consiguiendo en nuestro país y, por tanto, cambiar una situación que era muy mala, que era la precariedad. Queda mucho todavía, pero, desde luego, antes 1 de cada 10 contratos en España eran indefinidos, 1 de cada 10, y hoy tenemos más del 40% de los contratos en España son de carácter indefinido. Por tanto, aquel mantra que decía que la estabilidad en el empleo no permite crear empleo es falso. Les doy otro dato. Desde el año 2019, desde la reforma laboral hasta ahora, hemos creado en España 2,5 millones de puestos de trabajo. Por tanto, el primer mantra lo desmontamos. Segundo, no hay que despedir ante las crisis. A lo largo de la historia española, daba igual quien gobernara, todas las crisis se gestionaban desde el ajuste en el empleo. Lo que hemos hecho desde la pandemia y hoy ya en la reforma laboral, artículo 47 y 47 bis, con el mecanismo red, con los agentes sociales, es que ante las crisis no hay que despedir a nadie. Es decir, tenemos recursos públicos para sostener a las empresas y sostener a los trabajadores. Y, en tercer lugar, una estrategia laboral que tiene que ir de la mano de subir los salarios, no devaluar los salarios, por ejemplo, como la última reforma laboral del año 12. Esta estrategia, que ya no se discute en ninguna parte del mundo, la defiende la Comisión Europea, la defiende el Fondo Monetario Internacional o la OCDE, es la que explica que hayamos cambiado el paradigma en nuestro país, y es desde el mundo del trabajo que creamos empleo, pero que crece la economía. Y es lo que explica que hoy España sea la economía que crece en la OCDE y, desde luego, lo haga con calidad. ¿Esto quiere decir que no hay nada que hacer? No, queda mucho por hacer, pero, desde luego, sí es posible cambiar la situación laboral en nuestros países. Fíjese, yo recuerdo la primera reunión que tuve con los 3 comisarios en aquel momento, con el comisario Smith, con Gentiloni, con Dombrovskis, y cuando me dijeron en la reforma laboral el porcentaje de temporalidad que teníamos que alcanzar en España, dije, oh Dios mío, esto no va a ser posible, aunque sabía muy bien la reforma laboral que había que hacer en nuestro país. Y fíjese, hoy España está por debajo de la media de temporalidad privada europea. Por lo tanto, creo que esto es un éxito. Ayer me encontraba con los empresarios de la construcción, un sector que también se había teorizado que era imposible reducir la temporalidad. Pues hemos reducido la temporalidad en un sector, le doy un dato solo, de la construcción, que era a lo largo de la democracia española del 40%. Hoy la temporalidad en la construcción en España es del 14%, 2 puntos por encima de la media del resto de sectores, pero es que la hemos reducido singularmente. Por tanto, este es el camino.
Le quería preguntar más ampliamente sobre el tema de affordability que estamos mirando y, en particular, el tema de la vivienda en España. Primero, a nivel europeo, ¿cómo ven los intentos que se están haciendo para abordar este tema? Sabe que uno de los invitados que tenemos hoy es el autor del informe del Parlamento sobre la crisis de la vivienda. ¿Qué opina sobre ese texto y sobre este approach?
Voy a hacer una primera afirmación. La desigualdad en las sociedades es una decisión política. La primera fábrica de desigualdad hoy en nuestro país y en Europa es la vivienda. En España, de manera singular. Antes dije que durante 40 años el principal problema de España fue el paro. Hoy el principal problema de los españoles y españolas, voten a quien voten, es la vivienda. Es más, hemos subido el salario mínimo un 66% y suben los salarios en España, pero es que no damos satisfecho una necesidad vital fundamental como es acceder a una vivienda. Por tanto, primero, la primera afirmación, es una decisión política abordar el problema central que se llama vivienda. 2, Por primera vez, este año, lo conversaba con usted antes, en el EPSCO se ha tratado por primera vez en el seno de la Unión Europea del principal problema que tenemos en Europa. Es la vivienda, son los costes de las familias y son los salarios. Y no olvidemos, son las tres vertientes que estamos trabajando en el EPSCO en estos momentos. Por tanto, primero, bienvenido que hablemos de vivienda, pero vamos tarde.
Vale.
2, bienvenidos, estaba hablando ahora mismo con el ponente del informe, con quien quedaré para abordarlo. Bienvenido el informe sobre esta cuestión. Ahora bien, creo que el reto que tenemos es uno, y es qué política necesitamos en materia económica y, por tanto, de vivienda para entender que tenemos que dar salida al problema fundamental. Hoy se explican los populismos en Europa y en el mundo por muchos elementos de insatisfacción, pero hay uno que indican todos los institutos demoscópicos que tiene que ver con el malestar de la vivienda, que está generando una enorme desafección ciudadana. La primera cuestión es que hemos pasado de una economía productiva a una economía financiarizada, pero una economía ahora mismo, desde hace ya muchos años en Europa y en el mundo, que es rentista y que permite que se haga negocio, se especule con un actor fundamental que se llama vivienda a través de los fondos de inversión denominados popularmente como fondos buitre. Y da igual el país en el que nos encontremos. Hoy las viviendas en gran parte de nuestras ciudades, hasta las más pequeñas en Galicia, pasando por cualquier ciudad del mundo, da igual en la ciudad en la que nos encontremos, están en manos de grandes tenedores, de grandes fondos de inversión, por cierto, en los que tenemos que actuar. Por tanto, yo no comparto la estrategia que se está haciendo por parte de la Comisión Europea. Fíjese, el BEI está destinando para 2 años 10.000 millones de euros para la vivienda en Europa. Los informes hablan de una necesidad de inversión de 150.000 millones de vivienda. Pero digo más, en nuestro país dedicamos presupuestariamente el 0,1% en materia de vivienda. Necesitaríamos, para abordar de manera inteligente en España, el 1% del PIB destinado a esta materia. Pero hay que hacer algo fundamental, que es actuar sobre quienes son hoy los grandes tenedores de las viviendas en nuestro país. Por tanto, cambiar la estrategia de la política económica rentista, que, permítanme, los fondos de inversión, con todo respeto, tienen una lógica de saqueo. Son fondos de inversión que no pagan impuestos. Podemos hablar de socimis y demás, de este tema nunca se habla. El resto de las empresas españolas e internacionales pagan impuestos. Ellos no, o lo pagan de manera casi, permítame, yo qué sé, sin importancia. Por tanto, lo primero que tenemos que hacer es desarrollar una política pública en materia de vivienda que vaya destinada a la generación de un derecho fundamental. El artículo 47 de la Constitución española, el constituyente español cierra ese precepto prohibiendo la especulación en algo tan fundamental, como es la vivienda. Por tanto, ¿qué tenemos que hacer? De manera inmediata, no mediata ni a largo plazo, sino inmediata, reducir el precio de la vivienda. Esto es clave en España, es clave en una ciudad de Galicia, es clave en el barrio en el que vivo yo en Madrid, en cualquier barrio de Barcelona, en cualquier barrio de Extremadura, es clave en cualquier ciudad europea. Por tanto, reducir el precio, porque la gente no puede pagar un alquiler hoy y, por tanto, tenemos que garantizar que esto sea posible. 2, redistribuir la propiedad. El fenómeno fondo de inversión, fondo buitre, lo que está pasando es que está distorsionando completamente la construcción de un modelo social en el que me van a permitir ya, hablamos de manera casi caduca del ascensor social como un factor, ¿no?, de que los hijos e hijas de las clases trabajadoras no pueden acceder a la universidad y a otros sectores, pero es que ahora mismo ya de manera transversal el ascensor se quiebra porque no se puede acceder a una vivienda. 3, Estoy en Barcelona con ejemplos de políticas públicas muy importantes y soy ministra de Economía Social y Cooperativismo. Hay que hacer una apuesta firme desde España, lo estamos haciendo, aquí hay ejemplos de ello, desde España y en Europa por el fomento del cooperativismo. Hay ejemplos magníficos en Austria y en otros muchos países en el que el cooperativismo y también el cooperativismo en la cesión de uso es clave para que podamos dar salida al problema de la vivienda. Ahora bien, una estrategia basada en una política rentista de acumulación capitalista lo va a distorsionar absolutamente todo. De tal manera que, como decimos en el EBSCO, podemos actuar en el mundo del trabajo, podemos actuar en los salarios, pero como no actuemos en la vivienda, entendiendo y contribuyendo a la función social que tiene que cumplir la vivienda y defendiendo, que no hablamos de esto, no hemos hablado de esto en Lisboa, que recuerden ustedes, en Porto, sí, que hemos salido de Porto sin una declaración, la subsanamos después en un EBSCO, pero no hay Europa social sin abordar el derecho fundamental a la vivienda.
A la vivienda. Pues, vicepresidenta, nos ha hecho una apertura perfecta para el panel que vamos a tener ahora. Le doy muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Ladies and gentlemen, the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain, thank you very much. And now we're going to move on to our panel.
Ay.
Should we bring them on? And now I'm joined for our panel discussion. Joining me on the stage is Damaris Barajas Sanz, Director of Strategic Planning at Provivienda, Carmen Dura de la Sota, researcher at the International Tax Observatory, and Borja Jiménez Larraz, member of the European Parliament and author of the report that we were discussing before. Before we get into the wider topics, I wanted to ask you guys, what were your thoughts on the survey? What were the big takeaways for each one of you? So maybe we'll start at the end and move this way. Carmen?
Yeah, so I think, thank you very much, Aitor, first, for having me over. I think there is a clear crisis across Europe, and that's shown in the survey. Most Europeans cannot afford basic necessities, and we definitely need to address this quicker rather than slower, especially in terms of the housing crisis. The longer we wait, the worse and more long-lasting the consequences will be. One thing that perhaps is maybe not that central to the poll, but I found quite interesting in terms of housing was that there was a very widespread support among the citizenship of Europe for expanding public and social housing in this context of the housing crisis. And so I think that this is definitely going to be part of the measures that will need to be taken in order to not only get out of this housing crisis, but also perhaps prevent future ones. And yeah, it was quite unexpected. I also saw that it was particularly supported in countries like Germany, Italy, or Spain, where there's very, very little public and social housing. So I think Europeans are asking for a reversal in this sort of marketization of all of the housing assets. I think they want some public and non-profit intervention in the housing markets.
Borja, what about you? What were the big takeaways for you?
Yes, first thing that I would like to point out is that we observe clearly that housing, energy, and inflation have increased the financial pressure on the citizens, but the poll points out something that it is key, that it is that the pressure when we talk regarding the housing is structural, and in the other cases it is cyclical. So we have to take decisions, structural decisions, to face this crisis. Another important point for me that I would like to point out is that there is something that catch my attention, and it is that 75% of the Spanish are dissatisfied with the response made by the government regarding this matter of the cost of living. And when we talk about the policies they are developing in the area of housing, for example, 20% of Spanish people consider that the rent controls are not a good idea. 20% think that the tourist rental regulation is a good idea. Only 20%, I want to say, sorry. And however, nearly 70% believe that building more houses, public and private, is a good idea. And this is completely in line with the proposal and the plan that we have defined and developed at European level.
Damaris.
Well, I see a strong mandate, specifically in the Spanish population, on average, but it's very interesting how it is significant in Spain, because 2 out of 3 Spaniards are asking for more social and public housing, and I think that is strong mandate. And the Spanish are more concerned about expanding supply, probably, than capping prices, but both measures are complementary. And one thing that also raises our attention is that in some of the results of the poll could think that the average is okay in some terms in Spain in terms of anxiety about affordability and prices. But the problem is what is hidden behind that 32%, I think it was, that is on average okay, but that hides a population that is overburdened by housing costs and whose situation is catastrophic in terms of affordability and guaranteeing rights.
Right, because we're focusing a lot on how the crisis is hitting the middle class, but there are a lot of other people who are being affected by this situation. Borja, I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about your report? What are the main points that you would highlight in terms of the Parliament's approach?
Yes, first of all, I think that we should talk about the diagnosis that we have made. The reality is that during the last 15 years, the rent prices have increased 30% and the housing prices 60%. So this is a completely disaster. 11% of the citizens have to spend more than 40% of their income on rent. What we have found is that behind this situation, what there is a clear lack of supply. When we talk about the European Union, we need to build 10 million houses to meet the current demand. And in the case of Spain, according to the Bank of Spain, they established that we need to build 700,000 houses to meet the demand. And in this situation, what catch our attention is that during the last 5 years, the building permits have decreased 20%. So something is happening in the European Union, and we have to know what kind of measures we can take. This is what we have analyzed, and we have made some proposals with this clear objective that it is to try to boost the supply. Maybe I can tell you later about this measure.
Let me ask the other panelists. So Carmen, I saw your face twitch there. Do you think the solution is to build, build, build?
Well, I think that there can be some cases in which building more can be beneficial, but I'm pretty sure that building alone will not solve the housing crisis. I'm going to focus on 2 reasons that I think are important to mention. The first one is the time dimension, right? We have a crisis right now, and as I mentioned, the longer we wait, the more impact it's going to have in our societies and in our economies in the long run. So waiting until new buildings are completed is not a response to a crisis. The second thing is that even if we have those new buildings, they're going to be located mostly in the outskirts of our big cities that are already very, very saturated. And it's very unclear that they will bring prices down for existing housing. And this is something that we've also seen, especially in this country, in the past. And let's be clear, solving the housing crisis requires that prices go down because they're currently completely detached from the real economic capacity of the residents of the cities. So I suggest that we move on to other types of solutions. I don't know if I should discuss
Sure,
it now.
please.
So I think one of the tools that has been under-discussed and underused is the fiscal system. The fiscal system has benefits that it can act quite quickly, and it could change incentives for people to act in certain ways. And so one of the things that we can use our tax system for right now to increase supply is to ensure that the housing that already exists in housing markets that are saturated is actually put to be used as a primary residence.
Are we talking about empty homes or secondary homes?
Both.
Or both?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So we were talking about empty homes, secondary homes, and short-term rentals. I'm going to start with the first two. This is not at all a fringe phenomenon. In Paris, for example, in central neighborhoods, over 30% of apartments are empty most of the year. This is housing that is already available, that could be put in the market tomorrow, in a month, in 6 months, even if it needs some rehabilitation. And then we have, of course, the problem of short-term rentals, which, there is an option to regulate them, as some cities have chosen to do. It's also possible to overtax this kind of returns on short-term rentals in dense cities to disincentivize the transformation of usual homes into secondary residences. And if I'm allowed one last point,
please.
I think one last thing that we can do, and we should maybe look at doing with the tax system, is try to reverse a little bit the increase in concentration of housing wealth that we've witnessed since the 2008 crisis in Europe, which has been very dramatic and which is certainly part of the ingredients for this crisis. And what I'm talking about is that home ownership rates in Spain, for example, have gone down among the young generation from around 60%, over 60% in the early 2000s to around 30% today. And meanwhile, we've seen an explosion of multi-property owners. 80%, I think, of rental income received by individuals in Spain goes to the top 10% of income earners. So there's a huge concentration. And the tax system can be a very useful tool in addressing this and facilitating more people can afford to buy their own homes.
Tamaris, what are your thoughts?
Well, we in Provivienda, we say that the solution is already built. So we agree that we have to build more houses. But Spain doesn't have a problem of quantity because we have the highest number of dwellings per inhabitant in the whole European Union. The problem is allocation and how we guarantee that the most vulnerable and not only the middle class access the homes that are already built. And we think that the model, and we think also that the citizenship is demanding a shift in the model because of that dissatisfaction that Borja was talking about, and that's the problem of democracy. So we need a change of model. And in the case of Spain, there is a model that is already working, and it's, for example, the non-profit sector entering in the ecosystem of the housing markets and providing a solution, a long-term solution that can balance the market and that can act as an actor, professional actor with the private sector and with the public sector, because the citizenship is demanding more public and social housing. And I think we have to pay attention to that. So we can mobilize because we have the highest number of dwellings, but also nearly 4 million of empty homes, which probably not all of them are usable or are near employment centers, for example. But we have tools to mobilize. We have proven models that work, that incentivize the use of residential units, and that can create trust between the tenant and the owner. And we need policies that do that, guarantee rights and guarantee access to rights to everyone, and not only the ones that already can pay homes.
What are your responses?
Yes, first of all, regarding this matter of the empty dwellings, when we talk about Spain, there is a figure that talks about 4 million of empty houses, but the question is, where are these houses? Because maybe they are in places where people don't want to live. So this is the first and a very important problem that we have. Let me insist in the idea that a very high demand and a short supply push the prices up. This is the reality. This is a law. So if we need to build 10 million houses at European level, this has to be our priority, to build, and to renovate more houses. And now I think that it is also the position of the European Parliament, as it is in line with the report that was approved by the large majority of the Parliament, but also by the European Commission, that it is defending this line. And what are we proposing? We want to launch a simplification package. We know that now, in this moment, there are some regulation at European level that it is affecting the construction sector, for example, in the environmental area, so we should try to simplify. We need to speed up the permission, the permitting. This is something very important. We have included the principle of a positive administrative silence, and also the goal of 60 days for having done this kind of, we want to reduce taxes, but also for the construction of houses, always when they have a social policy objective. Also for the renovation. This is really important to promote innovation in the sector, but we need to build and renovate more. And we need also something very important that now in Spain we are seeing that we have several problems with this, that we need legal certainty in the construction sector and in the housing sector, because this is really important to give safety for the investors. And we need money. And we can talk maybe later now about the necessity to attract public money, but also private money. If we need to build 10 million houses, the problem is that it is not enough, the public money. Our political party and also the European Parliament, of course, we are completely in favor of promoting affordable housing, public affordable housing. But the question is that we are aware that this is not going to be enough. So we need to build massively.
Carmen?
Yeah, so first, maybe starting with the end, on the effectiveness of public and social housing, I want to point out that one of the strengths of this kind of measure, if it's done correctly, that is, if it's spread out throughout the city and not concentrated in some ghettos and some outskirts, it can actually benefit not only the people living in this type of housing, it can moderate the prices of the market. And this is what we've seen, for example, with the case of Vienna, which has over 40% of public and social housing, and which has not nearly experienced as severe a crisis. So it is a very, very big part of the solution in the long run, although it is something that will require time, and as Borja pointed out, a lot of investment. In terms of the investment problem, I think one of the reasons, perhaps, why there is not so much investment in new construction is because it's been very, very profitable to invest in existing units, purchase existing units just to put them up for rent. And this is, as I was saying, been reflected in a higher and higher concentration of housing wealth and a few wealthy individuals and companies over the last decades. So we should maybe disincentivize investing in existing housing and therefore reconduct some of those funds to new construction, to innovation, to renewable energies, to more productive sectors than just housing assets.
Damaris?
Well, I think if half of the tenants are already overburdened, increasing supply alone will not solve the access, and we could even reinforce inequalities. In the booming years of construction in Spain between 2008 and 2018, millions of homes and units were built, and the prices kept rising. So that alone is not the solution. We need to guarantee access for everyone and the control of inequalities. And in that case, again, I think the non-profit sector is a good actor because it could be a long-term solution with different profits, but specialized in accompanying vulnerable groups and middle-class groups, and be that balance in the market.
Is this, as the Deputy Prime Minister was saying, a political problem that requires political solutions?
Exactly, yeah, it requires political decisions, and the problem is not over-regulation, but what happens with those that are overburdened and are under-protected, so we need policies that protect them, and that's a mandate, as we see in the poll.
I have a question for all three of you. It's clear that this is a problem that's being recognized across Europe. In terms of finding the solution, do we require a real mind switch? Are public policies really prepared to address this problem in a totally different way? Because clearly what we've been doing until now has not worked. Is there a possibility for that shift in mindset that, for example, Commissioner Jorgensen talked about, finally recognizing that we cannot continue to see houses as commodities?
Yes, as soon as housing is a right, we need to act and regulate the market, having that as objective. So it's guaranteeing rights and developing different policies, and that's a European possibility on how to channel funds, whether private and public, and do a catalytic approach so that we can, well, the European policy can, for example, regulate investment according to GDP and increase that. The minister was saying that. So it's a change of mindset, but in the case of Spain, we can copy what is working in Europe, and we have a completely different model. So our share of social housing is the lowest in Europe, and
why is that, by the way? Like, why is Spain the exception in the negative sense, in that sense?
Well, probably because we stopped building public housing, and because we allowed that housing to be sold in the private market. So we lost the control of all that housing market that could benefit in a situation of crisis the majority of the citizenship. So the market is not balanced as it is in Europe, where the share of social and affordable housing is higher. So it can act as a balance to regulate markets and to allow all the actors to participate in the market, but guaranteeing rights.
What about you, Borja? Is there any country that you look at and you say, these guys have it right, this is the example we should be following?
Now we have two models that I could say that at least what they are doing is quite positive, and we can talk about the case of Netherlands, where they have a plan to build massively. They talk about
the Prime Minister has promised to build, I think, 13 new cities. And
yes,
yeah.
so this is in our line, because what it is clear is that the population is growing, so we need to build more, and this is the only way to try that the prices decrease. And also in Germany, they have a good proposal to reduce the bureaucracy and
right,
in all the process of construction. So this is in the line that we are proposing at European level. So I was telling you, for us, another important chapter it is when we talk about financing. And for me, it is clear that we have to advance in this public housing park. And in that sense, the European funds and the role of the European Investment Bank is going to be key. But from our perspective, we want to insist that it is really important to attract private capital, to flexibilize the access to credit for the private companies. And the only thing that I would like also to point out is that this is the only way to try to find a solution, because what we are observing at European level is that all these interventionist measures, maybe Barcelona, I think that it is a clear example. We have here the mayor of Barcelona, the deputy minister. They explain their views, their position, and from my political perspective, I want to say something about what it is happening. We talk about the price and rent controls, and it sounds great. It sounds really good. But the problem is that it is not working. It is not working in Barcelona. I think that the city hall knows it, but it didn't work also in Berlin, and they had to delete this policy. Permissiveness toward the phenomenon of illegal occupation. This affects the legal certainty. And this is a big drama because, in the end, exacerbates the lack of stock. The reserve of 30%, it didn't work also. The reserve for social housing here in Barcelona, it didn't work. The problem is that this disincentivizes the investment, and this is a problem because what we need is to attract more investment. And also, another important point that we observe here with the Spanish government is that they have announced the construction of 267,000 houses. The problem is that they have built in almost 8 years 10,000 houses. So yes, we can talk all the time about promote public housing, but the problem is that you are governing and you are not doing your work.
I'm going to turn to Carmen in a minute, who's shaking her head vigorously. I do want to ask you, because you mentioned it, and it caught our attention in Brussels as well. You mentioned the phenomenon of occupation. How big a phenomenon is this?
This is a reality. This is something that it is completely unfair. Of course, there is an important percentage. Now I don't have the figure, but in the case of Barcelona, it is quite high. You have to know that now in the Idealista here in Spain, there is a specific filter about the houses that are occupied. This is something that it is a scandal.
I want to turn to either one of you, because I feel that you're about to respond. Carmen, if you want to grab that first.
I think maybe Damaris has better numbers for Barcelona, but I think the numbers in Spain are below 0.01%.
So it's a minority issue.
Well, The reality is that in Idealista, there is a specific filter with houses occupied, and this is something that everyone can
But
check.
realistically,
How many, and there is also, the problem is that this is deeply unfair, and at the same time, the problem is that it is affecting very seriously the legal certainty. And when this affects the legal certainty, there are people who decide not to put the apartments in the market because they are...
But is this really a problem that we
Yeah,
can say is
this-
affecting Europe? That we should be worried about occupations of homes?
Well,
And
this is in Spain. It is clear that this is a problem. This is a clear concern regarding this topic, and also in other countries, as it is, for example, in Italy and Malta.
Carmen,
they are also
I'll turn to you
concerned
because
about
I know that you were trying to get in before.
Yeah, no, just to respond to some of Borja's points from earlier, I just want to insist again that there is no foundation, at least in economic research, that building more in the places where we can build will lower prices. So we should stop maybe thinking that this is going to be the case. And then I want to go back as well on the fact that you mentioned Netherlands as an example. And actually, Netherlands is interesting because I think in the 2024 law, they actually expanded the amount of rent-controlled units massively within the market. And they saw one thing, which was that institutional investors, large investors, started to pull out from the market, again, of existing homes. And the residents were able to become homeowners, or were able to buy those houses from the markets where these investors were exiting. So in some cases, it can also be beneficial. And I would also want to point out that recent research, at least when it pertains to France and other European experiences of what is called second-generation rent controls. These are more flexible than the first-generation ones. They're not a fixed cap. They're just moderating the growth. They've been proven to be quite effective, and there hasn't been any visible decrease in supply. So I think it can be part of a healthy mix, especially in the short run, if it's well designed and complemented with other types of policies.
Damaris?
Yeah, I think the examples that you've mentioned in Denmark or Germany and all the construction booming is being done hand in hand with housing associations, which I think is an actor that helps regulating the market. I think there are millions of investments and equity funds in Catalonia hand in hand with housing associations already operating in Spain, which are not regulated. We are demanding a law that gives us a framework to operate with the rest of actors. But I think we can attract funds that work and then that incentivize mobilizing construction and delivery of units and managing of units.
Well, we could clearly talk about this for hours, but unfortunately our time is up. So I do want to thank our three panelists today, Damaris Barajas Sanz, Director of Strategic Planning at Provivienda, Borja Jiménez Larraz, Member of the European Parliament, and Carmen Durer de la Sota, Researcher at the International Tax Observatory. Thank you all very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And now I will turn over for a short segment from Google, and then I will be back with you all.
Thank you.